Today's video is all about the Phalaenopsis Repot. Is it top or repot? And 4 reasons why I haven't made a video lately. Yes, 4 very specific reasons. All of this and more coming up at The Orchid Hut. Welcome back to The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana and thank you for joining me today in a hopefully long-awaited new video about repotting orchids. And today it's all about the Phalaenopsis. But we're going to talk a little bit about whether you really need to repot a Phalaenopsis or whether you can just top a Phalaenopsis orchid. So we'll get into the details of that here in just a little bit. And in the intro, I mentioned 4 reasons why. It's been a little while since I've made a video, and 4 very specific reasons. And a little bit of travel along with what I just showed you here in the video. And if you're interested in that full story, I'll be explaining a little bit of it along the way today as I'm repotting the orchids. And I'll show you even more very, very cute photos of my 4 specific reasons. Okay, so back to the orchids. You know, this is the time of year when you really want to set your orchids up for success. And I have a number that need to be repotted so that for the remainder of the growing season, they can do their best setting down some new roots in some fresh media. However, there may be an occasion where you can shortcut the process just a little bit if the orchid will tolerate being in the pot for another year. So we're first going to look at a Phalaenopsis orchid that doesn't need to be repotted, and we'll talk through the reasons why. And then I will show you what you can do to kind of get that orchid in a little bit better shape for the remainder of the growing season and hopefully postpone its repot for another year as long as the media is fresh. And then we will look at a couple of other Phalaenopsis orchids that really need to be repotted, and I will choose one today to repot in this video. All right, so let me clear the workspace a little bit, and we're going to talk first about the orchid that can just be topped instead of repotted. Okay, be right back. Okay, so let's first have a look at this particular orchid here. Let me remove it from its decorative pot. And this orchid was repotted about 2 years ago. The name of it is Sweetie Cat. One of my favorite orchids, Phalaenopsis orchids in my collection. This one still happens to be in bloom. It's rather colorful and unique. I do enjoy this one. I only got 3 blooms from it this year though. And since, when I kind of look at the media in the top of this pot, it is not too bad off. It doesn't really seem like it's breaking down. There are some roots that have previously come out of the bottom of the pot. As I'm looking through the sides of the pot, I'm seeing very healthy green roots, not anything, where it looks like I would have a whole bunch of dead roots to trim away. So, as this one has been in the pot for a couple of years, it does settle, and there is a little bit of exposure at the top of the pot. And if this one were to set down new roots, those new roots might have a little bit of difficulty finding their way down to the media because it is a little bit high, but not too high. So what we're going to do with this one, just to freshen it up a bit. Now, this is not, a substitute for repotting an orchid if it really needs it. This is just to buy a little bit of time, and I will address this one next year. So what I'm going to do is, and you can tell too that it's a little bit mis-centered in the pot. It's not exactly in the center. And after I add this media on top, just to address what has settled, then I will show you a little trick for how to straighten it in the pot just a little bit and make it just seem like it's a little bit more centered. And really that's about all it needs, is just that little bit of added Phalaenopsis media. And I happen to use Phalaenopsis Monterey Dark Imperial Orchid Mix from Repot Me. I get a lot of questions about the media that I use. And to kind of straighten this one a little bit, and I think I will remove the clip from the spike while I'm doing this, is on this back side here where it could be pushed a little bit more towards the center, I have already pre-cut a cork to fit, and I like to put that cork between the edge of the pot and the stem of the orchid, and it does, if you get the length of the cork correct, it does help re-straighten the orchid in the pot, center it a bit more, and let me get my clip here again, and I will re-clip the spike. And this one now has had a little bit of tidy up and looks a little bit more presentable for the remainder of the growing season. Okay, back next to make some decisions about which Phalaenopsis orchid we're going to repot in today's video. Okay, be right back. Okay, so the next 3 Phalaenopsis orchids really do need a repot ASAP. And we're going to have a look at each one and talk about why this is the case, and then I will choose one to repot in the remainder of today's video. Okay, so let's start with this one right here. And this orchid was actually the orchid that was featured in the video titled The Ultimate Phalaenopsis Repot. And I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner of the screen if you would like to go back and watch that video. It was about 2 years ago now, so it's it's time to repot this one again. You can tell that the stem is rather long and tall, way up above the media. It has grown a number of air roots since that time, very few of which have actually reached into the media. If I look inside the pot, I can see some roots that are brown, and when we get this one out of the pot, those would need to be addressed in order to kind of clean it up a bit. And mostly this one needs to be repot just because the stem has gotten tall and new roots really don't have a way to get down into the media very well. Okay, so this would be a candidate for repotting. And then this one is about the same. It was repotted at the same time as the previous one that I showed you. And the stem now, of course, is really rather tall above the media. And even if we were to add media to the top of this pot, it would not really address that tall stem that's, sticking way up high here. And I can tell that this one, as well as the previous one, is getting a little bit dehydrated because these air roots are really not able to provide enough moisture to the overall plant. And again, looking inside the pot, I see some green roots, but probably some brown ones as well that could be cleaned up. Okay, so that one needs to be repotted. And this one, which is my gorgeous large white Phalaenopsis. This is an old plant now, and you can tell these leaves are looking very sort of floppy and dehydrated. I do have a feeling that the root system inside here is failing. This one is about 3 years now since I last repotted it, so this is probably the one that we will be working on today, because I do know that the media here is rather old. And I'm also noticing a very, very, very tiny root right here beginning to grow, and this finding its way into the media, there's a slim to none chance that that would happen. It would just turn into an air root, which is not really what I want. And I would hope that it would be able to put some more roots down here, but these old dry bracts from leaves that have fallen away do need to be cleaned up a little bit. And we can work in some of these long air roots in the top of the pot to help hydrate the plant overall. Okay, so based on all of this evaluation, I think I will be doing this one first, and I'll be right back with a setup to repot. Okay, so we're going to take this one out of the pot and get a preliminary look at what we're dealing with here. This is a rather large pot for a Phalaenopsis. I have a sneaky suspicion that after I get this one cleaned up that it will be going right back in this pot. And probably what's holding this up from coming out is the fact that roots have grown through at the bottom. So these roots are, yeah, they're no longer living. Let's get the clippers here and cut away these roots that are growing from the bottom. And unfortunately, some of these are still a little bit green. I really just don't see being able to get this to release without cutting them away. They really have filled up the drain holes. Okay, let's see if that's a little bit better. Give this another try. And the big lovely mess that it makes. Okay. The cleanest floor in my city, because every time I do this, the floor has to be swept and mopped. All right, so let's finish working away some of this media. And I did water this orchid this morning, so you will see that some of the roots are green. And sometimes watering an orchid ahead of repotting not only keeps the roots a little bit more flexible so that there's less of a chance of snapping them, but when they turn green, it also helps you see a little bit better sometimes which of the roots are living and which ones are not. If it's white, green, lime green, or yellow, you should probably leave the root because it's living. If it's brown or black or mushy, then it's no longer living and it can be safely cut away as you're repotting. Or I should say even stringy. If it's stringy, it's also no longer living and can be trimmed away. Okay, so here's most of the root system now exposed. Not as horrible as it could have been, given that it was in this pot for 3 years. But the next step, because a lot of the bark is still clinging to the roots, I will take it to the sink for a quick wash, and then it will make it a little bit easier to see and to safely cut away the dead portions. Okay, so I'm going to get this mess cleaned up, go to the sink and rinse this orchid, and then I will be back with more orchid work as well as a few stories about my 4 specific reasons. Okay, be right back. Okay, so back from the sink. Now this is an absolutely massive root system, much of which is dead. So we're going to have to start slow here to figure out where pieces can be cut away. And so I'm cutting away everything that is brown, black, and or stringy that looks like this. And it is a process. Now, at some point, if this gets a little bit too tedious, I will fast forward the video, because once you've seen me cutting away roots that look like this, you know, there's just more of the same over and over again. So let me kind of get started here, and then I'll decide as I'm editing the video whether I want to fast forward this or not. But in the meantime, as I'm doing this work, I will give you the short version of my 4 specific reasons. Okay, so it was probably about the middle of May, maybe not quite the middle of May, maybe more like about the 10th of May. We came back from a short vacation, and a neighbor who, at the time, we didn't even really know that he was our neighbor because he was about 6 or 7 houses down the street from us. He was knocking at our door, and he was saying, "Do you have any cats?" It was kind of a bizarre thing to be asking because, you know, if you've watched my previous video, you know that I have had cats, and last summer we actually lost our last cat, and she crossed the Rainbow Bridge about this time last summer. So we were like, no, we don't have any cats. It was a rather bizarre question. But then, you know, come to find out, as we talked to this man a little bit more, they had been feeding a feral mama kitty, and they noticed that she was pregnant, and then they noticed that she had become very thin. So they imagined that she had probably had her kitten somewhere, and this man, being the kind, gentle soul that he is, he was going door to door asking if anybody had noticed cats in their yard. Well, we had been gone on vacation, so we really, you know, hadn't noticed such a thing. But we were like, okay, you know, we'll keep an eye out. And then I said, is it the tabby cat that has the fluffy tail? He was like, yes, that's her. And I said, well, she's been going through our yard rather frequently. And as we went into the backyard and kind of looked under things here and there, lo and behold, she had had her kittens under the potting bench in our backyard. Okay, so we had cats. So they were not very old. You know, we could kind of peek under and we could tell they were maybe about a week old at that point. So, just as kind of a side story, our neighborhood does have a bit of a problem with irresponsible pet owners not having their pets spayed or neutered, and, you know, then they maybe get away from them, and then kittens happen, and then, you know, those kittens become feral because nobody knows where they are, and they don't have any socialization when they're young, and there's a small window for that to happen, like in the first 8 weeks. And so we have this problem with a growing number of feral kittens in the neighborhood. And so it just so happens that the guy that was going door to door had actually done a good bit of rescue in his life. Fortunately, he knew what he was doing. And he said, well, he said, keep feeding her. You know, we want her to take care of the kittens as long as possible. And then, you know, we'll have to maybe try to find homes for them or something. I don't know. It was going to be kind of a mess. Well, so Mama Cat did take care of them for the longest time, and then she decided to start moving them around. We lost them for a couple of days, and then she moved them behind our air conditioning outside. And that wasn't going to work because we needed to have our air conditioning serviced and repaired and whatnot, and it was, you know, the nest of kittens was right exactly where they needed to work. And as well, it was about to start raining and flooding, and our backyard holds water, and, you know, baby kittens can't lay in, you know, 5 or 6 inches of water. So I picked them up. And that very first picture that I showed you at the beginning of the video was right after I picked up the kittens, and they were in a basket. And they had to be bottle fed for about a week. And the rescue people in the neighborhood helped us. And then we kind of took turns taking care of them, raising them, finding homes for them. And in the end, we found homes for all of them, which was really spectacular. They all turned out to be super sweet, friendly kittens. And at the end of this video, if you're interested, I will show you some more pictures after they grew up a little bit. And you can see how cute they are. All right, so enough about cats. And if you haven't already clicked away from this video, our root trim is getting close to the end here. So you can see how it looks now. There's a lot more openings in between the roots. We don't have to worry about, every single little piece of bark being broken away. And in places where a piece of leca, like right here, is stuck, we don't need to worry about trying to pry that away because that's inorganic anyway and it will not rot. Trying to remove it will just damage the root, that's still living. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fast forward the last little bit of this trim, and I will see you on the flip side of the fast forward. And here we go. Okay, so I do believe this root trim is complete, and I'm going to go give this one more wash at the sink. I'm going to let it air dry just for a bit, and then I am going to spray this root system with 3% hydrogen peroxide because it has been in this pot for quite a while. And then I'll be back with the cleaned pot. We're going to go right back into the same pot and we'll repot this orchid. Okay, be right back. Okay, so the last bit of this video is to get this orchid back in the pot. And you might be wondering, how in the world am I going to get the overall plant and the stem to be further down inside the pot if I'm using the same pot? Well, there's going to be a little bit of a twist action going on, and you'll see how that works out. Okay, so the last little thing though that I want to do before putting this in the pot, because I think it's easier to do this when it's not in the pot, is to cut away some of this very dry bract where the leaves have fallen away previously. And if possible, and if they're not too tough, I want to cut away a bit more. That one went flying across the kitchen. I want to cut away a bit more of the old bloom spikes. Okay, and there is one new little root coming through right here. I want to be very careful not to damage that. And sometimes these very dry bracts that hang on to the stem kind of prohibit the roots from growing out as well as they might otherwise. So I'm not going to worry about, coming down way far where roots have previously grown. But I do want to cut away some of this that's at the top of the stem. Down here it doesn't really matter. There are no new roots that will be growing down this low. You can pull away some of the bract if possible if you just want to keep it from decaying inside the pot, but trimming it away is really not going to help the root system at this point. So, if you get yourself in this situation, just do the best you can. There's really not any way to have perfection here. I have pieces of old spike sprayed across the entire kitchen floor. Okay, so the goal is going to be to have the media be right about here where my fingers are, so that this little root right here can go straight down into the media. And so that means that about you know, an 1.5 inches extra of the stem needs to be below the media surface. So let's start, let's see, let's put just a tiny, tiny bit in the bottom. We can't overdo this here because we need, you know, all the space we can get. And we are going to be trying to get those air roots in the pot. So I'm lowering it down. Some of these longer air roots that have been outside of the pot for quite a while, I am going to intentionally pull those out because I want to make sure those end up more at the top of the media and not buried, because those roots have not been adapted to being in the media. So that one is okay. This one was out. Yeah, okay, that's looking pretty good. All right, now, here we go. Trying to have it be centered. We're going to twist and push down. Twist and push down. Twist and push down. Okay. And so there we are. It is centered in the pot. And now I can add the new media. And when I'm almost full, I will take those roots that have been air roots and I will just kind of gently layer them at the top of the pot. This gives them the best opportunity to adapt and not be overcome by being buried. Okay, so this one I'm going to thread in. You know, as I was making that last segment of the video where it was taking me quite a while to trim the root system, I had a flashback to a comment that I had received on another video, and it was something like, "You're too slow, you take too long, just get on with it." And I have to chuckle at comments like that. If you want fast, this is not the Orchid channel for you. I'm about the detail. So basically, if I'm too slow for you, then you just need to find another Orchid channel to watch. Seriously. You know, every single person who has a channel has a sort of a presentation style. And I'm an educator at heart. And I believe that, you know, your orchid hobby is your therapy and you should enjoy it. And that means that you shouldn't feel rushed to get things accomplished. I think your orchids can feel that negative energy. So truly, you know, not every orchid channel is for everybody. That is just the truth of it. Okay, so this air root, I'm gonna kind of slowly, you know, it's already been kind of broken, not snapped in two, but it does sort of have a kink in it. And probably what I will do is that if these orchids don't want to sort of stay inside the pot, I will come along and use my paper clip trick and, you know, kind of hold them down in a few places. But these are so long that once they get wrapped around, they really can't come out, especially if I put just a tiny bit of media on top. Not a lot, just a little. They still want to feel like they are more in the air than buried. Okay. And I think that does it. Maybe a little bit more right here. You know, this is a no ID Phalaenopsis. It has never had a tag, but gorgeous large white bloom. One of the favorites in my collection, also one of the oldest orchids in my collection. Okay, so let's have a look here. Stem is now, at the proper level. Right there is the new root, and that, as it grows, will want to be directed into the media. We won't have to search so hard to find it. Okay, I have a gigantic mess to clean up. If you're interested in seeing a few more kitty pictures, I'll insert them here at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button is coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And until next time, happy orchid growing.